Hi guys, and welcome to another video, and welcome back to the Resume Monstrosity. And today, I'm going to be teaching you how to make a chess game in Scratch with pieces, and you get the idea. So we're going to start out with just the basic movement and pawns for this episode, and then next episode we'll do the more complicated pieces. So I do have a starter project if you want to use that, uh, or you can just create your own custom looks. I just recommend using the starter project because the tiles are kind of hard to draw out exactly 45 by 45, or if you just want to have a quick start, or if you're bad at drawing pawns. So, otherwise, feel free to make your own. If you do use the starter project, please use with credit. Well, you're going to be crediting because of the tutorial, because you used the tutorial anyway. But even if you are using just like your own chess, or you get the idea. Okay. So let's just get right into it. So we're going to start out in the grid sprite, where we're going to be doing most of the magic. So we have 4 costumes here. Don't worry about these yet. We're just using these for now. Okay, so what we need to start out with is we need to add a 1 flag clicked, and we need to position it in its proper position. So if we, let me just get it on screen. Okay. So it needs to start out in the left-hand corner. So to find out how far left it needs to be, it's actually pretty simple. So we know there are going to be 4 tiles on this side because on this side there's going to be 4 tiles as well because everybody knows that there's 8 tiles. That there's the chessboard is 8 by 8. To find out where it needs to be on the left, we'll need a 0 minus because we're going to be starting on the left, obviously. And it's just 45 times 4, right? Because the length is 45, and there are 4 of them. So if we put that into the equation, it gives us negative 180. So that's how far to the left it needs to start, and then it'll be the same for the y. So we can just go to negative 180, and same with the y, negative 180. Kind of. I said kind of. We need to offset it for x and y, because the Y, it starts slightly off the screen because the tile position is in the center. So because of this, we're also going to have to offset X. So we'll just subtract 180. We actually need to add, because we're starting with a negative number, add 45 divided by 2. Okay? This gives negative 157.5. Negative 157.5. And it's going to be the same for Y. Okay? So that gives us the perfect position. Okay, you don't have to do all the operator stuff. Just use these values if you want. Or you could do it if you want. So, now we need to actually copy it. So we're just going to go repeat 8 times. And then we're going to simply create a clone of myself. Change X by 45. Not really, because it isn't changing its costumes. So, not only is it not changing its costume, but it's creating an extra one. That's why it's not centered. And it's not creating an extra one, it's just because of the original sprite. So just hide the original sprite and show it. Okay, that's better. And I know there's these gaps, but that isn't that's unnoticeable once you add a next costume between these. So if you are using my starter project, this is what it will look like. So we're just gonna add a if equals 3 and use costume number on the left side. So if costume number equals 3, then we're just going to simply set it back to first one. So now we'll get a proper overlay. Sorry, proper, whatever you want to call it. if you didn't use my starter project, then you are going to want to create these two costumes selected and the two selected costumes. You can make them different colors if you want. I just chose red. And of course, you are going to want to do this. Better to do it now than later so you don't forget it. So now we need to clone upward. So to do this, we could just repeat this again, but we also need to change Y after that. And we need to reset X. So how are we going to do this? Well, remove the hide for now, and bring in another repeat loop, repeating for 8 times. And we're basically doing, what we're doing is we're just setting X back to its original position. There. So once it's here, it'll go back here. And we also need to change, and we need to do that in the repeat loop. And then we also need to change change Y by 45. And then you'll need to grab the entire repeat loop and stick it in the middle. That way it'll set its X position, then it'll run this, then change its Y position. That needs to be Y. Okay? So it'll do that over and over again. So if you do that, and remember to put the hide back on the bottom. So we run into another bit of a problem here. So this is the script here. X, repeat 8, here, just if you missed that. Okay, you got it? Great, okay. So, first of all, this, it's not setting itself properly, and the reason for that is it's not setting itself at the beginning. So here, make sure you set it's white. And then over here, we also have a bit of a problem, where it's kind of leaning upward. So to fix that, add a next costume at the bottom of the repeat loop, just above the change Y. So, what is going on here? And it's simply because we just don't have this in, so make sure you put this underneath this next costume. Once again, here's the scripts. Okay, got it. Great. Okay, so that's fixed now. Great. So this is pretty much it's the entire cloning scripts. But we do have a minor problem. And if you've played chess before and you know the rules really well, you know that this right here, this black tile in the corner, that is not right. So just switch this to black. That way we have white in the bottom right corner, like a real chessboard. If you know real chessboards, if you've seen a real chessboard, white is always in the corner like that, always. And as I said, there are still lines there if you look really closely. They're unnoticeable, so don't worry about them. There's simple, tiny errors in my square. Tiny. But other than that, it looks perfect. So, now that we've got the grid down, we can start scripting pawns. So, with the pawns, we are going to be doing basically the same thing. So just create your pawn and stick it where its spot is. Okay? So now we need to move it to that position always at the beginning, right? And then we can basically do the same thing we were doing with the tiles. Repeat 8 times. Create a clone of myself. Move 45. Change X by 45. And then remember to show and hide. Okay. So, let's do something about the animation. So you click back into the grid sprite, create a new block called setup, I guess. Let screen refresh. So now move that entire script and setup. Right, and then do the same for the pawns. Setup. Screen refresh. And setup. That should run instantly. Okay, and you can see we can mess it up as much as our heart's desire. We can drag these blocks around, clicking it just resets it. Okay, so we need these pawns to move, and we need the grids to cooperate. So to do this, we're not actually going. We can't. It's not going to work if we just move them and then detect if touching, then kill, move, do that, because we wouldn't be able to detect if there's a piece in front, and it would take lots of scripting. It would just be hard, and it would be wrong way to code it. So we're just going to use the lists. So to do lists, we're just going to click back into the grid sprite and create a new list. Um, and then call them. You might have seen them, but just call them board grid. Okay, leave it for all sprites. Now create another block. Call it setup pause. That's random fresh. And all we're going to be doing here is repeating 64 times, which is how many tiles there are. And we're just going to add blank to board grid. Make sure you add a delete all so it doesn't stack. Okay, so now that we've got the grid in place, we need the pawns to have a position in it. So for this to happen, create a new variable called pawn, pawn ID for the sprite only. Make sure it's for the sprite only, otherwise it isn't going to work. Also make sure you've created it in the pawn sprite and not in the grid sprite like I did. Okay, pawn ID. Okay, at the start of the script, set pawn ID to 1 and change it by 1 as well, right after we create a clone of myself. Okay, so now we also want to set it back to blank at the end, just so that the original sprite doesn't interfere and doesn't have a clone ID. So just set it to blank right here. Okay, so now these are all going to get pawn IDs. So now we can use the pawn ID to do lots of things. One of those things would be to actually have a position on the grid and on the board. So drag in a when I start as a clone. So the first thing that needs to be done is we need to give it a position on the grid. Okay, so we're going to use replace item. Okay. So what are we going to do here? So this needs to be a specific equation to make sure that these have their position. So the equation is actually, I've already prepared it, but it is pawn ID minus 1 multiplied by 8 plus 2. So basically what this does is it gets the pawn ID, so say the pawn ID here, this is 1, right? Pawn ID of 1. Subtract 1, you get 0, right? Then you multiply by 8, and you get 0. Then you add 0 is actually down here. And you plus 2, and you get 2, right? Same with here. This pawn ID is 2. Subtract 1, that goes here, times 8. Sorry, this pawn ID is, pawn ID is 2. So subtract 1, you get 1 here, times 8 plus 2. Alright, so just trust me on that one. Alright. Another thing you could do is use a script that we're going to create later. Okay, so once you've got that one done, the next thing is to give it a x and y position. So the create a new variable called x for the sprite only, and another variable called y also for the sprite only. So x and y, well, y is obviously going to be 2, because it starts on the second, okay? And x is definitely going to be pawn ID. You can tell that because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 2. So, just that. And those are the x and y positions set up. Okay, so the next thing we are going to need is a way to find the pawn position. So now we have these variables in place. We need to be able to see what is the pawn's position on the x based on their x and y position. So create a new variable called find index. If they have their x and y position, they do not have their index. And yeah, we could just look through the list and find out, but that'd be extremely complicated because each pawn has a different thing. And if we wanted to make it, each pawn has the same like white pawn, and we'd have to make those different, and then it would just be super complicated, so I'm not going to go into that. When here, we can just create a new variable, call it index or pawn index, but index so that we can copy it between sprites easier. And under find index, we're simply just going to set this to y plus. So when it needs to be y plus 8 times x minus 1. So what does this do? Well, we know that y plus 8, because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, adding 8 has the effect of moving down moving through one column. Okay? And the reason we do x minus 1 is so that we start at 1 instead of 8. Otherwise, it would be x would always be, like, if x is 1, we'd always be adding 1. So we'd end up on something we don't want. So we want x to sometimes be 0 if pawn ID is 1, right? Okay, so now we can find the index. Just add a find index there, and find the index after we set up as well. So now that the pawns can find their position on the stage, we need to do some more coding with the grid so that the grid also knows their positions, so we can click to move the pawns on the grid. So click back into the grid sprite, and now we're going to give the grid tiles also x positions and y positions. Well, we're not going to give them x positions and y positions. We're just simply going to give them an an index. So create a new variable called tile index. And create another variable called tile iterator. Or just tile I. So we're going to set tile I to 1 and tile index to 1 as. And then after this, after the change x, you're going to set tile you're going to set tile index to tile I. And then down here, you're going to change right above the change x by 45, or right below it. You're going to change tile index by 8. Okay, so now the reason we do this. Oh wait, don't forget to down here. Don't forget to change tile. So what this does is the reason we can't just set it to one variable to 1 and then change it by 1 here is because we are actually the way we do this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and we're cloning this way. So this actually has to be 1, 9, 17, so on and so forth. And which is why tile I comes into place, because every time we go here, it actually lowers. So we go oh, here we were at whatever this one is, and then we jump back to here, which is 2. Which is why we need to do this and this. Now in theory we could have just cloned it that way, But it would have been harder to deal with the white pawns. Actually, it would have been easier, but no, it would have been harder. It would have been harder. It's easier to just do this with the grid and then get it over with. Because with the white pawn, we would have had to then create a way system for it to jump through the grid instead of just adding one. Which we're going to have to do anyway for the longer pieces, but you get the idea. Okay. So, now we have enough information to start moving the pieces. So, click back into the white pawn sprite and add a when this sprite clicked. So what we're coding here is the selection to move. The first thing we're going to do is find index, and then we want to check to make sure if not equals blank. Oops. And not pawn ID equals blank. So we want to make sure this is not the original sprite, just in case it was showing or for some reason. So then we're going to switch it to selected. We're going to switch the costume to selected, and then we're going to set well, we need to set a variable to something else. What we need to set is the selected piece index, so the piece that we're selecting index, the index of that to the to our index. But we can't do that because we don't have a variable. So to do this, just create a new variable called selected piece index for all sprites. Keep it for all sprites. We're going to need this later, and just set it to index. So right now it's actually going to do nothing, but we are going to need it next tutorial. So just make sure it's in there. Also, it helps to make sure that the index are setting correctly. So just click over all of them. It should go 2, 10, 18, 26, 34, 42, 50, 58. Okay. So the next thing, we need to make sure that they start unselected. So just under the setup, just make sure you just switch it back to the original custom. Okay, so now we need to create a block to detect all possible moves of the pawn so that the grid can respond. So create a new block and call it find possible moves. Okay, so to do this, we're going to need to search for 2 moves and a 1 move. So the first thing you want to do is just find index. We want to make sure we're always finding the index so that we keep the index constant. Then we're going to create a new list. Call it possible move indexes. And you're going to simply delete all of possible move indexes. Then you're going to add index plus 1. Okay? The possible move indexes. So add index plus 1. Okay? And then we need to check for if it's in the home row and add index plus 2 if it is. To do that, we just check for y equals 2. Because if y equals 2, then it'll mean it's on this row, it's on the home row, it can move twice. So, there we go. Okay. Now, underneath this, find possible moves, and then repeat until mouse down. So we're going to need this later, but just leave it there for right now. Okay, so the next thing is we actually do need the grid to do something here real quick. Make sure you actually are deleting all possible move indexes when you click the flag. That's going to be really important later. Okay, so just gonna hide these. Okay, so the next thing we need the grid to do is we need them to change their color. We need them to show that they're selected, that the piece can move there when the piece is selected. So when this piece is selected, these 2 tiles have to light up, signaling that you can move there. So we're just gonna drag in a when I start as a clone forever, an if else, and then put in if else inside the else statement and inside the if statement. and then put an if statement inside both else's. Okay, so the first if else statement, check for possible move indexes containing tile index. Okay, so that's just if the pawn can move there, has added it to can move there, and this grid tile is like, ooh, it can move to me, let me light up. So that's what that is. Then we need to check whether it's selected or not. So check for if costume number equals 1. This will be if white is selected. Okay? If the tile is white. Okay? If so, switch it to white selected. Else, costume number equals 2, then switch to black selected. So if it's 1, so that just detects whether which selected costume it should change to, because otherwise it's all the same color and it looks really bad. So the next one is if it doesn't contain it, then it needs to make sure that it is on the right costume. So check for if the costume equals 3, which is black selected. So we need to switch it back to black. And over here, if costume equals 4, switch it back to white. And these, of course, won't run if this costume are like these, and these won't run because of this. So if this is false, that means it's not like, I can't. It's like, that means it's like, I can't move there. Then it'll be like, are you any of these costumes? And it'll be like, no, so it does nothing. However, if this is false, but it is one of these costumes, it needs to change back. And the reason we add this is so that, because if we didn't add this if statement around this, it means selecting these would change all the costumes white, because this would be false, then this would be false, so it would just, break when you select things, of course, and it would turn the game into a painting game, which last time I checked it is not. So now, as you can see, I can select pieces, and it will show selections. But then we also have a slight problem, whereas these pieces do not unselect themselves when you select another piece. So in theory, they are still selected, they don't look good. As you can see, there's a difference between that and that. So we need to fix that real quick, otherwise we're going to have problems. So to fix this, we're just going to have to make it so that when you click another pawn or the backdrop, it broadcasts a message to all other pawns. Then the pawns check if they were clicked, and if they were not clicked, then they unselect themselves. And if the backdrop was clicked, then none of these pawns were clicked, of course, so they all unselect themselves. So we're simply going to find when the sprite clicked, and at the very beginning, we're going to broadcast unselect. Okay? Okay. And also, when stage, drag another one and just drag it into the stage. It should automatically change, but yeah. When this stage clicked, unselect. And then, when I receive unselect, then we're just simply going to check if not touching mouse pointer. So if we were not the ones that were clicked, then we need to switch back to pawn and stop other scripts in the sprite for now. That just makes sure that this doesn't run later. It shouldn't affect anything else. So now, pawns unselect themselves. That also unselects themselves. But, as you can tell, no pawn selected. This is still. So we need to make sure that over here in the stage, we delete all of that. Okay, so now clicking off of the stage, hides them. Okay, so the last thing we need to do is actually move the pawns forward. Because right now, they kind of just look nice. So the way we're going to do this is by going into the grid and adding a when the sprite clicked. And then we're going to just check for, whether or not this grid piece is selected. If so, we're going to set the index of this grid into another variable, broadcast. This one will pick it up. Then it will move to that grid position of the variable set. It'll make sense in code. Okay. So the first thing we need to do is make sure this is not the original sprite. It probably isn't, but still. Just not equals blank index. Okay. So now we just need to check for if it is selected. That's if costume is greater than 2. Because all costumes greater than 2 are the selected. Then create a new variable. Call it move 2 for all sprites. And set that to tile index. No, not yet, tile index. Okay. Then broadcast a new message and call it move piece. Then click back into the pawn sprite. I don't want to receive move piece. And the first thing you want to do is find index. Then, of course, we want to check to make sure this is not the original sprite. That's not pawn ID equals blank. Then we want to make sure that this is the selected pawn. Otherwise, like if this gets so let's get my own if statement. That doesn't want to give me any if statement. It won't give me any if we want to make sure that this sprite that is coming is the selected piece. Otherwise, all sprites, all clones are going to move forward. And we don't want that. We only want the selected ones. So to do that, we simply check if selected piece index equals index. I told you we'd need this because now if the selected piece index equals the index, it means it's the exact same piece because pieces can't be in two places at once. They can't be in the same place. So that means it can only be that specific piece. So it can continue. So now we need to check if, if else, and we're going to simply do move to equals index plus 2. If this is true, that means that the move to place is 2 places forward. That means we're moving forward. We're simply going to repeat twice. Change y by 45. And then remember to change the y variable by 2 as well, to make sure that the index is calculated correctly. Then on the bottom, change y by 1, and only change a y by 45 once. Okay, the next thing we need to do is we need to replace, you can do this below the else statement, replace item index of board grid with blank. So in the list, the piece it's on, the list is on is going to be replaced with blank, and the piece it's moving to is going to be replaced with pawn. Okay, and then make sure you delete all of possible move indexes. Then we need to unselect it. So you could either just do this, or if you want to make it easier on yourself, you could technically do broadcast unselect. But the problem with this is that if you're fast enough, or if you glitch it on mobile or something, it is going to think that you are on the same piece, and it's going to keep selected, which won't be a big deal. It's just better to just do switch costume to pawn, stop on the scripts and the sprite. And then lastly, at the very bottom, you want to find indexes again. Okay, so you can hide the variable now. And if you click the flag, as you can see, things are moving. So anyway, guys, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Leave a comment down below if you want to see more tutorials like this one. I will probably be posting more chess tutorials, how to make a chess game in the future. But for now, yeah, that's going to be fixed in the future for sure. Because as you can see right now, it is completely broken. So we will be fixing that in the future, but stick around for future episodes. I will see you next time.